Democratic State Representative Lance Yednock will be leaving public life behind on his own terms. He chose not to run for a fourth term at the Capitol. His staff member, Amy Murray Briel, won her boss's seat on November 5th. Yednock first won election in 2018 when he defeated Republican incumbent State Representative Jerry Long. Yednock went on to win re-election in 2020 and 2022. During his time in office, he's been witness to some really dramatic events, from the advent of COVID to the closure of 2 hospitals in his district and the replacement of a 3rd hospital in his district. He's about to become a private citizen again on January 8th, and so he agreed to sit down with me at his district office, call it an exit interview of sorts. I anticipated a meaty discussion. You're going to see that here. In fact, I'm splitting the interview into 2 parts, and today is part 1. Thanks to Kathleen Whalen of Whalen Financial in downtown LaSalle for sponsoring this weekend reset. Here's part 1. When I was trying to think of how it would be best to start with this, my first thought was, can you do a broad arc from your first inauguration all the way through to where you're saying goodbye now? How would you, if you were to rate that time frame, was there an up period? Was there a down period? What is the arc here?
Yeah, that's interesting. I've thought about that before. There was a bit of a euphoria in 2019. We passed some major pieces of legislation that I was very happy about. And then in 2020, as you're already starting to think about campaigning again, because it's every other year, COVID hit. And I would say during the COVID period, it was tough. It was level, but it was tough. We were still seeing a lot of good things going on in the state of Illinois as far as our budget woes were getting better. Revenues were coming in. We were able to do some things that we needed to do, refunding. And so that period was kind of, in the middle. It was just like a bell curve. It was pretty good. And then the last year or two, partly because I knew I was a lame duck, partly because I had some personal issues going on in my family, and just, my sort of part of the Democratic Party is a very small part anymore. I felt I was a little challenged on the last little bit. So I think it's almost a standard bell curve.
That's interesting, but what's highly unstandard, I guess, is what you came into when COVID hit. You met, this was quite a period you were down there. You didn't meet in the Capitol for a while, correct? You met in, or was that?
We did for lame duck. We met in the Bank of Springfield Center. So for a little bit we met over there, but it was so expensive we just couldn't continue to do that.
But still, it's unusual, and you were sort of having to live within rules that you were also writing in a way too.
Correct. Yeah.
So that was just a very interesting period that you served in, and coming out of it, then there seems to be a lot more anger. Even more than we've been used to before. You talk about how you are very much a centrist, and that's how this district largely is. Mm-hmm. Is there a place for this in Illinois anymore?
I think we're gonna go back to that. I think the swing will happen. I think we're starting to see that. One way we could go with it is that maybe instead of being a far left, maybe the far right takes over for a while. I don't see that happening in Illinois. I think it's just such a Midwest moderate state, though we have pockets of deep red. We have pockets of deep red here. But honestly, when you're out knocking on doors, you find out that the people that vote Republican as a Democrat, the views aren't that different. But we have got into this period, whether it's because of social media or because, let's say, Congress, maybe starting back in the Newt Gingrich days, really started to kind of fight it out ideologically and principally for the number of seats with many other techniques and strategies that we've sort of got into this habit ourselves. But I do believe that the center's we're going to go back to the center at some point, but it's one of those pendulum things.
Will we stay there?
I don't know that human nature allows us to stay there. I think there are advocates and activists on each side of the aisle, or each side of the ideological spectrum. I don't really even want to call it each side of the aisle, because within each side of the aisle, each party, the only 2 parties we have really, there's 3 or 4 different parties within that.
You could almost have 4 or 5 different aisles with as they go across the spectrum. Interestingly, the district was redrawn Has that affected politics at all? Have you noticed maybe at the retail level, has the new district changed how you do your job? And will it affect how maybe Murray will go about her job?
I think it's possible. I still think that the bottom line, like in construction or in banking or in what you do in radio and media, there are set ways of doing things. There are principles that you have to just do. And the retail part of it is going out and seeing people being accessible. I think when we think about like our Congress people, they're so inaccessible to most people because their districts are large and they're in Washington, D.C. They are removed from the everyday bit of life, I would say. I'm not knocking them for that, but it's the truth. When you get to the state level, you're a little bit closer. But still, our districts are pretty large. And then when you get down to the county, community level, those are the people that are really having to do the stuff day in and day out. And they have a lot of different sets of issues they have to deal with than we do at the state or at the federal level. So the retail part, I think, is going to stay the same. You have to just go. But the district has changed. It was trending a lot harder for a Democrat to win. I think gerrymandering in a university city was helpful to the Democratic Party, and I don't mind saying that. I'm not saying that with malice or anything because it helped me, and we've seen both sides of the aisle in different states use that.
But it is truly a gerrymandered district.
For sure. I'm not going to hide that.
No, I'm not. But I'm saying that can affect things. I mean,
absolutely.
Then it almost polarizes in some ways if you're reaching to grab a group of people.
Yeah, the interesting, it's probably not unique here, but I would say this corridor around the Route 80 corridor is a little more conservative, moderate than the university city. Though I knocked through the university city at least once, and they have a lot of the same concerns as we do. It's just, again, we have outsized voices on each side of the party that sometimes the other side feels that, oh, that's who you are, that's what your party is. So. Anybody that runs for office is still going to have to do the same things. Otherwise, we're seeing this pattern nationally and internationally where incumbents are losing. Institutional organizations are being pushed aside. It's a very strange time in political history.
We mentioned a minute ago about how it's maybe the example was set at the federal level before it got to the state level. But a lot of people that you work with in Springfield have eyes on Washington, and so perhaps they've just adopted that tone. And so would you say that over the past few years you've seen more of this as you've been there, more of the rhetoric amping up, or maybe it's gone down after Trump left office initially?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think it's probably still leans a little bit more. It seems like some of my colleagues down there some of them are looking for the next step. And when one particular party is trending a certain way, they're jumping on that bandwagon. Whether they mean it in earnest or if it's just opportunism, I think you have to admit that politicians at some level are opportunists. Me and some of my colleagues debate this all the time.
Not a bad thing.
No, I just think it's the truth, and it's not. So it doesn't make me feel great to say that, but it is the truth, and that's what makes me think that. Like right now, when you're seeing things being turned over every couple of years, that maybe the flavor for politicians will be maybe we have to just kind of tap it down a little bit. Otherwise, we're going to keep turning off, one side or the other. That's my assumption, at least. And I'm not a political scientist. I honestly think people go down to Springfield or to Congress with mostly those intentions to be good people. I think it's hard sometimes when you get down under the dome that you're in a tent with a whole different group of people that are alphas in their own right. They've won their elections. The activist class is big in most political parties, and I mean left and right, Republican and Democrat. And that sometimes gets imbued in members where they feel if they don't vote a certain way or go with that group or, kind of do lockstep that there'll be punishments. And I'd say to some extent that's true. There's a group in the Republican Party that tries to overturn their leadership year after year, the more moderate leadership. I think that they've hung on. And in our party, I think I've been party to that part where I don't vote the same way that the rest of the party does. And I can't always put my finger on it, but when certain things don't get put on the calendar or the docket, or I don't get a call back from someone in the governor's
or your name
staff.
comes off a bill suddenly.
Yes, and I've experienced all of them. Not being a victim, I'm just saying that is one outcome of that. I still think that most people go down there with very good intentions in their mind. They just have to be very careful not to get pulled into that, to thinking you're the only person that can do this job, that you're the most important person, you're the smartest person. I see some of that too, and it makes me uncomfortable. I think what happens sometimes is people get into that world and they get used to being called representative and all the things that come around it. And it's just
lobbying dinner.
Yes. It's a very. I'm glad it always made me uncomfortable. I have a group of friends down there that we were always uncomfortable with that. I'm not saying I didn't partake by any means, but I was always uncomfortable with that because of, you think that there's a quid pro quo, and there's those issues too. That is the system we set up. But if my colleagues can continue to tell themselves that we're here to serve our districts and our state and our country, that's where we need to be.
Lance Yednock got a lot more than he bargained for when he first won in 2018. So much that there is going to be part 2 to this exit interview, and you'll see that soon. Thanks again to Kathleen Wayland of Wayland Financial in downtown LaSalle for sponsoring this program. Have a safe and happy New Year.